students need to see examples of nonviolent change and conflict resolution. They need to see that they can become peacemakers. These are the words of Barbara Stanford. And aside from her last name, I'm quoting her because she said something really important. The belief that students need to learn about peace studies when they go to college, about peace education. And this goes along with three claims in my presentation. The first, that peace studies is an academic field, like biology, like economics, like any other field. The second, I'll be conducting a historical case study of peace studies efforts in the 1980s at Stanford to try and understand what were the main barriers to a peace studies program in our past. And third, I'll be discussing why I think we can overcome these barriers to a peace studies program if students, faculty, and administration come together for peace. So let me start talking about why I think peace studies is an academic field. And there are a few reasons for this. Peace studies has a commonly accepted and agreed upon definition, like any other field. And according to Dr. Abdul Saeed, who is the founder of American University's Peace Studies program, that is an interdisciplinary academic field that analyzes the causes of war and explores processes by which conflict and change can be managed to maximize justice while minimizing violence. Maximize justice while minimizing violence. So to back up this definition, like any other field, there's also tremendous peace scholarship and research. And let me just point to two examples of this. I was really surprised over the summer when I found out that in the Green Archives there is this peace pamphlet called Ain't Gonna Study War No More on Peace Studies, which was created at Stanford in 1985 by students and faculty. Now there's also more traditional peace research, like peace journals, like Peace Review, a journal of social justice, which also, coincidentally, was created at Stanford in the late 1980s. So we can look to our own school's history for examples of peace research. Now, there's also tremendous peace programs, minors in peace, majors in peace, even a PhD program in peace studies at Notre Dame that we can look to as models for our program here at Stanford. Now let me just focus on one at that school across the bay. We don't like to talk about too much. But they actually have a great peace and conflict studies program. Michael Nagler, the guy in the purple shirt down there, who came to Stanford a few months ago, created a program with an Intro to Peace and Conflict Studies program. And he really framed it around this great framework of peace and conflict. And you can actually go to YouTube and see videotapes of his lectures. They have hundreds of thousands of views. It's sort of this famous peace scholar. You can also take into account another measure of success, which is graduates. So graduates of the program have gone on to careers in law, in mediation, in business. So if peace is so academic, if it has a definition, if there's peace scholarship and peace programs, then why hasn't there been a peace program created at Stanford? And that's really the driving question behind my second point, which is that there are two main barriers to a peace program. Internal division. We have to get people together with a unified focus for a peace studies program. And two, administrative apathy. We have to get the Stanford administration on board for peace studies. So let me start by talking about one point about internal division. So in 1984, the peace studies course debuted at Stanford. And as you can see by this diagram, it was a fabulous achievement, but the peace studies course tried to survey a number of different topics related to peace studies. Some faculty wanted to look at history of war. Others wanted to look at pacifism and Gandhi. Now, pacifism and Gandhi and the history of war are very different topics that the faculty tried to merge together, but didn't really work out. Students really didn't think that there was any unifying framework for a peace studies program. And actually, I spoke with a guy who was one of the main teachers for peace studies for 24 years, from 1984 to 2007, Byron Bland. And he said, quote, "I don't think the first peace course had a good sense of what it was focusing on." So he was pretty frank and honest about peace studies needing a unifying framework, a guiding principle, so to speak. Now, there's also internal division between students and faculty in this historical case study, namely Judy Adams. Judy Adams probably isn't someone you've heard of, but she was a student at Stanford in the 1980s, just like us, and she actually wrote a proposal to the President Kennedy at the time to create a peace major. But the faculty task force shot down Judy Adams' vision for a peace studies program. The faculty task force thought, no, we should just work on improving this peace course I just talked about. There wasn't the faculty and student collaboration necessary in the 1980s to create a peace program. There wasn't that cohesion between Judy Adams and the task force. let me talk just for a second more about this second barrier to a peace studies program, which is more of an external barrier, right? So we have internal division, but we also have administrative apathy. We have an administration that we need to convince for peace studies. In the 1980s, this administration was apathetic towards peace. This pictured here is Dean Caroline Luigi, someone who actually cut funding for peace studies in 1985. And I spoke with Peter Frank, who was a member of the task force. He's actually now 90 years old and living in Germany. And he still remembers that, quote, the dean was very reluctant about the faculty peace studies group. If a 90-year-old German can still remember this, probably a good idea that the administration was a tough barrier to overcome. So I've been talking a lot about the negatives of peace studies at Stanford, why it can't come around. But I do think that we can overcome these barriers as long as three groups come together. And these are students, faculty, and administrators. So I'll start with talking about how the faculty can actually play a positive role in peace studies. And they have to realize that diversity does not mean disunity. And here's what I mean by that. You can have faculty come to a program with diverse interests. So look at American University, where Dr. Saeed is interested in international conflict resolution, whereas another person in his program, Joseph Groves, pictured here on the right, is interested in religious perspectives on violence and nonviolence. Groves and Saeed have very different interests, but they're able to come together around conflict resolution as a framework for peace studies. And that's something that we can learn from, faculty here can learn from. Now the second variable in this equation for peace is the administration, something I've been hammering on. But the administration can also play a positive role. Administration can recognize that there is a gap in peace studies at Stanford that needs to be filled. And they can learn from American too. So they can learn that American, the administration actually meets with Dr. Saeed every month and are very proactive in terms of collaborating with the faculty around peace studies. They meet together and have meetings where they talk about some issues related to peace studies, what's going wrong in the program. The third variable is the most important, and that's why I'm speaking to you. It's the people in this room, because students play the most important role in demanding for a peace studies program, or any other program for that matter. And students can learn a couple things. We can learn that Judy Adams shouldn't be held up as some utopian dreamer, but as someone who saw a gap in academic offerings at Stanford and responded to them. She responded to that gap with a vision for peace studies that was never realized. And we can also learn from American too. We can learn from graduate students at American, who according to Dr. Saeed were the main force behind the peace studies program. The main force was graduate students, not Dr. Saeed, this legendary conflict resolution expert, but graduate students. So to end, let me go back to the quote I started with. Students need to see examples of nonviolent change in conflict resolution. They need to see that they can become peacemakers. I hope you understand now why peace studies can fulfill a gap in our offerings at Stanford, and why we can become peacemakers as long as we demand something that needs to be filled. And I also hope you understand why Barbara Stanford was right. Thanks.
Thank you. Questions for Cole on peace studies at Stanford?
Yeah. First, thanks for the presentation. But also, with regards to peace studies, you talk a lot about its role in college, but do you think it could also play a role in maybe lower levels of education too?
Yeah, definitely. As I was doing research, I was learning a lot about peace education more broadly, and there is a big role for educating high school students and even elementary school students about issues around peace and justice. And you can actually, and that would be a great role students could play. Students could learn that, and then when they enter college, they would have a base in peace studies already, so that then they could go to all these majors and minors across the country that are already established. So that would be definitely.
How does our international relations major factor into this? Is there a class that you can take to kind of make your own peace major at Stanford?
Yeah, so that's a good question, because a lot of people, when I've talked to over the summer, said, what about IR? Doesn't that cover some of the same topics? IR is more interested in conflict resolution, not necessarily peace studies. So it's looking at, you can fashion, I did a survey of courses related to peace over the summer, and there were definitely some in like history and IR. You could fashion some sort of major. A student did it a few years ago, got a major in peace studies. It was independently created. but it's really difficult when you have all these courses in a lot